Hello, it is early February 2018. Greetings from Nashville, Tennessee. We're going to talk today a little bit about replacing the clutch rod on an NSM 45 jukebox mechanism. I'm going to explain a little bit about what that is and how to replace it and the symptoms that you'll get if this is broken on your 45 jukebox. So let's get right into that. Okay, symptoms that you will get if you have a clutch problem or a broken clutch are a lot of times you'll hear a click, click, click. You'll hear the motor running. You'll hear the motor running, and you may hear a click, 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 but the mechanism doesn't really do anything. It just sits there. That's a common symptom of this, and these clutch rods are a common failure of these mechanisms. Generally, if they're being run continuously in a location that the clutch rod might break on average every 3 years or so, but that probably wouldn't be as often in home use since it's not getting used as much. But they do break, and it does cause these problems. So let's get into how to repair that. All right, here I have a clutch rod. Let me see if I can zoom in on this for you. Okay, this is a clutch rod, and this is a component that the clutch rod interfaces with inside of the mechanism. This piece would go on there, like so, inside the mechanism, and it rests on this little ridge. I think you can see that. There's a ridge on here. So the three problems that you'll run into on these clutch rods are that the ridge itself will break, causing this piece to just slide too far up and down the shaft, which pretty much makes it useless. The second problem that I've seen many times is that the very tip of this rod will break off because the plastic is very thin on the end, and this piece will break off, and there's a steel pin, which you'll see here in a minute, that goes through this opening in the end of this rod, and if that breaks, then that pin will just fall off into the mechanism or down into the jukebox and get lost, and it can't do its job. So that's the second problem. And the third problem I've seen is, I don't know if you can see this, but there's a slot on the end of this shaft where an E-clip attaches, and that holds all this together. So that sometimes will break off, again rendering the whole system useless. So let's get into how to fix that. Okay, so this is the mechanism. This is the clutch rod. I'm going to reset this. The way you do that if it's tripped is push that up. This is the position it would be in normally when it's tracking up and down your magazine. This is the scan position. When the clutch solenoid, which is right here, when the computer detects it wants to play a song, the solenoid will fire, and it'll knock this clutch lever off of a pin. I'll show you that in a minute. And it pulls this fork and the clutch up against the mechanism, and that's what transfers it into the play position. So if this rod is broken, that is the problem. Now, let's see if I can get a view of this. This is I'm going to show you this a little bit better here in a minute, but this is the trip lever sitting on the post. To the left of that is the trip solenoid, which fires that. The solenoid fires and pushes that lever off of that post, and that's what pulls the clutch by spring pressure up. Now, this is the steel pin. I think hopefully you can see that in there, if I can get it in the light just right. If you look at the top of that gear in there, you'll see the end of that steel pin coming through that clutch rod. See if I can move it where you can see it. I'm moving it up and down. See, that's going through the tip of that clutch rod, and that's what pushes up to change it from the scan gear to the play gear. So that has to move freely up and down in order for it to transfer the motor's power from the scan gear to the play gear. Alright, so now we're going to remove that. Now, just so that you don't have to do this in order to change that, but it will make it easier, and that is to remove this back plate. There's 2 screws here and a couple of springs, so let's take these springs off on both sides. They just pop loose, and you've got 2 screws. As I said, this is not necessary, but it does make it easier to get this all this apart and get to it. And you can see this is the trip solenoid, and there's the post that the trip lever rests on. Now I'll explain how to get that back in position later. By the way, while you have this apart, it's a good idea to examine some of these other components. Sometimes these gears will get very, very worn, and that causes problems. If you have a groove worn in that gear right there, it can cause other problems. I'm not going to get into that right now. We're just talking about the clutch rod. So, here's what we're going to do. Let me see if I can get a better angle. Alright, so the first thing you're going to need is a pocket screwdriver, preferably magnetized, because that if you happen to lose something in here, it helps to have a magnetized screwdriver. And you'll need a pair of hemostats. I highly recommend. These are probably indispensable for this job. So what you want to do here is take notice before you do anything on these mechanisms. Make sure you take notice of how they're assembled, because you're going to be taking this little piece off right here. It's got an E-clip on it, so just get your screwdriver in there and pry that E-clip off at the very end. Set that aside. Now I'm going to pull this clutch back, but you need to take notice of how this actuator fits in there, and it has a very distinct shape, and you want to put it back exactly as it came off. Alright, so I'm going to set that aside exactly the way it came off so I won't forget. Same goes for the spring. You've got a little spring here. Take that off. One end of it's larger than the other. The large end goes up against the mechanism body. So we're going to set that aside, and then you've got a washer that goes up against the body that actually hits that little ridge on that pin, and that's what pushes it. Careful you don't lose any of this stuff. Okay, now you've got that. Now your pin is free from the fork, but it's not coming out. That's because you still got the steel pin in the end of it. So now you need to pull the pin out of the end of the clutch. Now, if your clutch is broken, some of this may not be relevant, because if the tip is broken, that steel pin's not going to be there. It's going to be lost in the bottom of your machine somewhere, or up inside this mechanism, that needs to be repaired as well. However, hopefully you can see this. I'm going to go in here and grab this pin with the hemostats and just pull it out. Now I'm replacing this on a perfectly good operating mechanism, so yours may vary. That's the clutch rod. Now yours will be broken in some way or another if you're doing this operation, and your pin may not be there. You're going to have to find that pin. I recommend a magnet on a stick of some sort if you've got to probe around in the bottom of the jukebox looking for that part. This is what it looks like. See if I can get it in a contrast area. Let's see if we can zoom in on that. That's your steel pin. This is what you're looking for if that is lost. I'm going to put it on the hemostats. That goes in the end of the shaft, the end of the clutch rod, and that's what actually turns the gears. Alright, so now we've got all that out. It's a good idea, if you've had one broken, to clean up inside of this area here. What I do usually is I'll put some WD-40 up in there and just squirt it through and try to flush out. There may be pieces of the broken clutch rod up inside of there, and if that's the case, you need to clear those out before you install the new clutch rod. Hosing it out with some WD-40 works quite well to flush out the old pieces of plastic, or you can maybe take a small steel probe or something, and fish up in there, and just make sure that you get that hole clear before you try to install your new part. Now, these new clutch rods are available online. I did some searching just the other day, and I found these in various places for about $25 US. For what it is, that's a little bit much, but to get your jukebox working, that's not very bad. So that's what a new one looks like. You got the hole in the end up here and the ridge right there and the little slot on the end there. All of that is very important. Alright, so now to put this back in, to reassemble it, we're going to put the clutch rod into the end, into the hole, and then we're going to assemble the block on the end. So what we want to do first is put the washer back on, and the fork will kind of get in your way, so you might want to pull the fork out of the way. You've got to put that washer behind the fork. You can use the fork to shove it back on there. Same goes for the spring. Now the spring has a small end and a large end. The large end goes up against the washer, and the small end is pointing towards you. And then you want to put your little clutch actuator back on exactly as it came off. In this case, it goes on there just like that. Alright, and then the spring tension hopefully will pull that in. And then put your E-clip back on the end. Now this is tricky. Be careful you don't lose the E-clip in the process. Here again, the hemostats are helpful. And the pocket screwdriver. And we've put the E-clip back on the end. Now that's all secure and moving freely. Now the last thing that we need to do is reinsert the steel rod through the end. Now this is very tricky, and you can damage your brand new clutch rod if you do this incorrectly. So let's see if I can show you this. Here's our clutch rod moving up and down. You can see that there's a slot in that steel shaft. What you want to do is rotate that, and you rotate that by turning this gear up here with your finger manually. You rotate that gear and you will turn that slot. And what you want to do is turn that slot until you've got a good line of sight straight through it. And you can turn the white gear by moving the main gear shaft on the back side of here, right there. You can grab that and you can rotate that to get a good line of sight. So once you've got a good line of sight all the way through there, then you want to make sure that the clutch rod itself is lined up. So you just take the clutch rod itself and turn it until you get it lined up. And when you've got everything lined up straight away so where you can see right through that, you're ready to insert your shaft. Your steel pin. Now the pin you're going to want to put on the end of your hemostats. Just clamp it on the end of the hemostats, good and solid, so you don't lose it. Alright, now you've got that on your hemostats, you're ready to insert it. Now this is tricky because you've got to kind of hold the clutch rod in position so that you can get a good shot through there at it. So I'm holding the mechanism with one hand, I'm grabbing the clutch rod with my thumb, which is a skill, it's tricky. You're going to keep that thing to where you can shoot the pin right through. And I dropped my clutch rod, so hold on just a minute. This is very tricky to do. The better you get that clamped on there, the better it will be. And it keeps trying to unclamp on me, so watch out for that. All right. You can slide this back out of the way. But ultimately you're going to want to get that in position so that you can slide it straight through there. You should be able to see all the way through that. And then you're ready to put the pin back in. Don't force it, because if you pinch it, and damage the plastic on the tip of the shaft, that is going to cause problems. This is where it's very, very important to get it straight through and lined up perfectly. And when it goes in, you'll know it, because it'll just slide right in. If it doesn't want to go, then adjust your line of sight on all of your parts. Now I say don't force it. You will have to kind of push on it to get it to go in there. You just don't want to be too aggressive with it. There. Got it back in there. Okay. Now, we've got to put this back together. Now the clutch is completely reassembled. Hopefully you can see that. See if I can zoom out a little. The clutch is reassembled. Now we've got to put the trip assembly back together. Now, what you want to do here is just take that to the left, put it on there till it just bumps up against there. Put your screws back on very lightly. Don't tighten them up yet. Just get them kind of close. Your two screws. And then this thing will move to the left and the right. It's slotted. You'll feel the spring tension from the trip rod on there. What you want to do is just get it up against the trip rod and then move it ever so slightly to the right and lock it down. Generally that'll do it quite well. But the idea here, and I'm going to push this towards me to get it back on the post. And then I'm going to try to get to where you can see this. I don't know if I can. Zoom in a little bit. What you want here is for that to be on that post halfway between center and the right side. So if it's a little off, trip it, move the part just a little left or right and lock it down and try it again. Now you can trip it by just putting your finger right in between, right in here, and with forcing your finger in there, you'll knock the end of that and you'll trip it. And now you can see that it is tripped. It's fallen off of the post. See if I can get it. Come on, shine the light in there. Now it's off the post. That's the play position. And down here you'll see that the forks are up against the body, and that's the play position. And in here, the pin is in the upper position. Alright, so that's reassembled. That's all good. And that should work just fine. I don't have a machine here to put this in to try it, but that will solve the problem if your problem was a broken clutch rod. Now, one other thing I want to mention is this locking cam right here. This has a few different positions. This is what releases your mechanism from the. You're all familiar with this if you've ever taken the mechanism off of there. And I got to put these. I didn't put the springs back on, so let's do that. You want your springs to be reassembled. And those right there, you lift those up to release the mechanism and take it off of the magazine. But the point here I want to make is that this locking cam has a little flat spot on it. I think you can see that. It's got a flat spot right there. That is to allow this to come all the way down and release off the magazine so that you can release it from the magazine. When you're operating this machine, you just want to rotate this down to where it's pointing straight down. That is the operating position. So make sure that when you're running your machine that is in that position. That keeps the magazine from coming off, or the mechanism from coming off of the magazine, but it doesn't put too much tension on it. If you rotate this all the way around, that's the shipping transport position, and it puts more pressure on these rollers so that the magazine, or the mechanism doesn't come off of the magazine. But you don't want this position to operate because it binds the mechanism up more and it'll make it run slower. So be sure when you're operating your machine that this is in the down position. Alright, and that should solve your problem if your problem is a broken clutch rod. I'll try to put a link to a place or two where you can order a clutch rod if you need one. So thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Have a pleasant tomorrow.